I used to think gratitude was a form of power, that if I remained humble enough, generous enough, grateful enough for the help my in-laws provided, they would continue to see me as worthy, as someone who deserved their resources, their connections, their careful management of the life I could no longer manage alone. I was wrong about what they saw when they looked at me. My son Wayne was 3 when the diagnosis came. Cerebral palsy, severe developmental delays, a constellation of complications that required specialists I couldn't afford and equipment I couldn't pronounce. My husband Bruce had left 6 months earlier, not because of Wayne's condition, though that's what his mother Loretta told everyone. He'd left because he was sleeping with a colleague named Elaine from his law firm, and Wayne's diagnosis gave him a convenient narrative for his departure. Loretta never mentioned that part. She presented Bruce's absence as a tragedy of circumstance, a man broken by the weight of a disabled child. And she presented herself as the solution to that tragedy. Within weeks of Bruce's departure, she'd arranged for Wayne's care to be managed through a trust, one she and her husband Gerald controlled. They would handle the medical decisions, the insurance claims, the scheduling with specialists. I would be free to focus on being Wayne's mother, on providing the emotional support he needed. "You're already carrying so much," she told me the day I signed the paperwork. We were in her lawyer's office in Pasadena, a place with leather chairs and mahogany furniture that smelled like money and competence. "Let us handle the logistics. You just love him." I signed because I believed her. I signed because Wayne needed a neurologist who cost $300 per visit, and I was making $32,000 a year as a part-time bookkeeper for a small medical practice in Glendale. I signed because the alternative was watching my son suffer while I drowned in medical debt. I signed because gratitude felt like the only currency I had. That was 4 years ago. Wayne is 7 now. He uses a wheelchair, communicates through a tablet, and requires around-the-clock care that costs more per month than I used to make in a year. The trust pays for everything: his aid, his equipment, his therapies, his medications. Loretta and Gerald make every decision about his treatment, his schedule, his education plan. I stopped being consulted around the time I questioned why Wayne was being sedated so heavily. It was a Tuesday morning, 18 months ago. I'd arrived at Loretta's house in San Marino, a sprawling Spanish colonial with a pool, a guest house, and rooms larger than my entire apartment, to find Wayne barely responsive in his chair. His eyes were unfocused, his movements sluggish. We were in the sunroom, the space Loretta had converted into Wayne's primary living area. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the manicured garden. Everything was beautiful and expensive and wrong. "What did they give him?" I asked the aide, a woman named Sharon who'd been with us for 6 months. Sharon looked uncomfortable. She was adjusting Wayne's position in his chair, her movements practiced and gentle. "His medication. Same as always." "This isn't the same. He's never this out of it." "You'd need to speak with Mrs. Hawkins about medication questions." I found Loretta in her study, reviewing what looked like financial documents spread across her antique desk. She didn't look up when I entered. The study was exactly what you'd expect. Built-in bookshelves, original artwork, a view of the rose garden, a room designed to communicate authority. "Wayne seems overly sedated," I said. His neurologist adjusted his dosage. He was having increased muscle spasms at night. "I wasn't told about increased spasms." Loretta finally looked at me, her expression patient. She was wearing what she always wore: expensive casual clothes that somehow managed to look both effortless and deliberate. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was subtle. She looked like someone who had never struggled with anything in her life. "You weren't here at night, Janet. We handle his overnight care. The adjustments were necessary. I'm his mother. I should have been consulted. You were informed. I sent you an email last week outlining the medication changes. I hadn't received any email. I checked my phone right there, scrolling through every message from the past month. Nothing from Loretta about medications, nothing about spasms, nothing about any changes to Wayne's care." "I didn't get any email," I said. Loretta's smile was gentle, concerned. "Perhaps you deleted it by mistake. You've mentioned before how overwhelmed you feel with all the information. That's exactly why we manage these things, so you don't have to track every detail." The implication was clear. I was overwhelmed. I was disorganized. I couldn't be trusted to keep track of important information about my own son. I wanted to argue. I wanted to insist that I would remember an email about changing my son's medication. But Loretta was already turning back to her documents, the conversation concluded in her mind. "I'm here now," I said. "I'd like to stay with him today." "Of course." Though Sharon mentioned she planned to take him to his aquatic therapy session this afternoon. "You're welcome to come along, but I know Tuesdays are when you work." I did work Tuesdays, 4 hours at a medical practice where I managed their accounts payable. It was one of the few parts of my schedule that was still mine, still separate from the life Loretta had organized for me. "I can miss work," I said. "Can you?" Loretta's tone was mild, conversational. "I thought you mentioned last month that you were already taking too much time off. Didn't your supervisor speak with you about reliability?" She was right. My supervisor had spoken to me. Because I'd missed 3 days in 2 weeks when Wayne had a respiratory infection and I'd stayed at Loretta's house to be with him. Stayed in the house Loretta owned with the son Loretta's trust funded, following a schedule Loretta controlled. I went to work. That evening I drove back to San Marino to say goodnight to Wayne. The drive from my apartment in Glendale took 40 minutes in traffic, longer if the 134 was backed up. I made this drive every day, sometimes twice a day. My entire life had become a series of drives to see my son in someone else's house. Wayne was more alert when I arrived, smiling when he saw me, reaching for my hand with the limited movement he had. I sat with him for an hour in the sunroom, reading his favorite books, letting him control the tablet to tell me about his day. The tablet had pictures and words he could select to construct sentences. It was sophisticated technology, the kind that cost thousands of dollars. "He had a wonderful session," Sharon reported when I was leaving. "Very responsive in the water." I smiled. I thanked her. I drove home to my apartment, a small one-bedroom in a complex near the Glendale Galleria, and I tried to remember what it felt like when Wayne lived with me full-time. That had ended 8 months after the trust was established. Loretta had suggested very gently that Wayne might benefit from more consistent care, that my work schedule made it difficult to maintain the routine his therapist recommended, that her house was already equipped with ramps, a roll-in shower, specialized furniture, that she had the space and resources to give Wayne everything he needed. "You can visit whenever you want," she'd assured me. "This is about what's best for Wayne." I'd agreed because she was right. My apartment had stairs at the entrance. My bathroom was barely big enough for me, let alone Wayne's wheelchair. I couldn't afford the modifications, couldn't afford to quit my job to provide the care he needed during the day. I was making barely enough to cover rent and basic expenses. The trust paid for Wayne's care, but it didn't pay for me to live. So Wayne lived with his grandmother, and I became a visitor in my son's life. The medication incident bothered me for weeks. I checked my email obsessively, searching for the message Loretta claimed she'd sent. I never found it. I searched my deleted folder, my spam folder, every possible place it might have gone. Nothing. But when I mentioned this to my mother Irene during our weekly phone call, she suggested I might have been mistaken. "Loretta has been so generous," she said. "My mother lived in Sacramento, too far away to visit regularly, but close enough to have opinions about my situation. Perhaps you're being overly sensitive. You've been under so much stress." I stopped mentioning it, but I started keeping a small notebook. Nothing dramatic, just dates and brief notes. When I visited Wayne, what condition he was in, what I was told about his schedule. I didn't know why I was doing it exactly. It just felt important to have my own record of things, my own version of events. 3 months later, I received a call from Wayne's school. They were concerned about his attendance. He'd missed 7 days in the past month. Did I know he'd been absent so frequently? I did not. Wayne attended a special education program in Pasadena, one that cost the trust $40,000 a year. The school had adaptive equipment, specialized teachers, therapists on staff. It was exactly the kind of place Wayne needed, and apparently he wasn't going. I called Loretta immediately, my heart racing. "Wayne's school says he's been missing a lot of days. He's had some medical appointments," she said. Her voice was calm, unsurprised. "I thought I updated his attendance calendar, but perhaps I forgot to share the latest version with you. My apologies." "What kind of appointments?" "Routine follow-ups, nothing concerning." 7 appointments in a month isn't routine. There was a pause. I could hear papers rustling in the background, the sound of Loretta multitasking while managing my concerns. "Janet, I understand you want to be involved, but questioning every decision creates unnecessary stress for everyone. Wayne is receiving excellent care. Perhaps you should focus on the aspects of his life where you can be most present. Emotionally, rather than logistically. Emotionally, rather than logistically. As if emotions were all I had to offer. As if the practical aspects of raising my son were beyond my capabilities." "I just want to be informed," I said quietly. "And you are. But sometimes your emotional state makes it difficult for you to process information accurately. That's not a criticism. It's completely understandable given everything you're managing. My emotional state, my inability to process information, my unreliability." I added the phone call to my notebook. Date, time, what was said. I started documenting everything. 4 months passed. Wayne's 8th birthday approached. I wanted to plan a party, something small at my apartment with a few family friends. I mentioned it to Loretta during one of my evening visits. "That's a sweet idea," she said. We were in her kitchen, a space with professional-grade appliances and marble countertops. She was preparing dinner, something elaborate that involved fresh herbs from her garden. "Though I'm not sure your apartment is equipped for the number of people that would create. And Wayne does better in familiar environments. Why don't we have the party here? I can arrange everything." It made sense. It was practical. My apartment was small and not wheelchair accessible. Loretta's house had space, had a yard, had everything Wayne needed. I agreed. The party was beautiful. Loretta hired a magician who specialized in shows for children with disabilities. She ordered a custom cake from a bakery in Pasadena that charged $12 a slice. She invited Wayne's therapists, his aide, several of Gerald's colleagues who had children, Wayne's age. She'd transformed the backyard into a wonderland, balloons, a bounce house that was wheelchair accessible, tables decorated with Wayne's favorite cartoon characters. I invited my mother and my sister Darlene, who drove down from Sacramento together. Halfway through the party, I realized I hadn't been included in any of the planning. I didn't know who was invited until they arrived. I wasn't asked about the cake flavor, the decorations, the entertainment. I was a guest at my son's birthday party. When I mentioned this to Darlene, she frowned. We were standing near the pool, watching Wayne laugh at the magician's tricks. "Did you want to plan it?" I wanted to be asked. "But you're so busy with work. And Loretta does this kind of thing so well. I thought you'd be relieved not to have to organize everything." Maybe I should have been relieved. Maybe I was being ungrateful. Maybe the problem was me, my need for control, my inability to accept help gracefully. I took pictures at the party. Wayne in his wheelchair, grinning at the magician. Wayne with cake smeared on his face, looking happier than I'd seen him in months. Wayne surrounded by people who cared about him in a house he lived in, funded by money I didn't earn. I went home that night and added a note to my notebook. W's 8th birthday, party at L's house. Not consulted on any planning. Felt like a guest, not a parent. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from an attorney named Douglas Carver. His office was in downtown Los Angeles, in one of those buildings with names that signified money and power. The letter was on heavy paper, the kind that felt expensive when you touched it. He represented the trust that managed Wayne's care. The letter informed me that due to ongoing concerns about parental stability and decision-making capacity, the trust was requesting a formal psychological evaluation. I read the letter 3 times before the words made sense. They wanted me evaluated. They wanted a psychologist to assess whether I was mentally stable enough to make decisions about my son. I called Loretta, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "What is this?" I asked. "What concerns?" "Janet, please understand this isn't personal." Her voice was soothing, the tone you'd use with a child or a confused elderly person. "The trust has a responsibility to ensure Wayne's best interests are protected. There have been some patterns that concerned us." "What patterns?" "Your difficulty processing information, your questioning of medical decisions made by qualified professionals, your emotional responses to routine situations. The school mentioned you called them in distress about Wayne's attendance, even though everything had been properly documented." "I wasn't in distress. I was asking questions." The school characterized it differently, and that's exactly the kind of perception issue we're trying to address. This evaluation will help clarify things. It's really for your benefit as much as Wayne's. "And if I refuse?" Another pause, longer this time. "Then we would need to explore other options for ensuring Wayne receives appropriate parental oversight. But I'm certain that won't be necessary. You'll do what's best for him." The threat was implicit, but clear. Submit to the evaluation or risk losing access to Wayne entirely. I scheduled the evaluation. The psychologist was a woman named Cynthia McKenna. Her office was in Pasadena, in a converted craftsman house that had been divided into professional suites. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines about healthy living. Everything about the space was designed to appear non-threatening, but I felt threatened anyway. Dr. McKenna was in her 50s, professionally dressed, with the kind of neutral expression I imagine therapists practiced in front of mirrors. She spent our first session taking my history, my childhood in Sacramento, my marriage to Bruce, my work, my relationship with Wayne. "Tell me about the support you receive from your in-laws," she said during our second session. "They've been very generous," I said carefully. I was learning to be careful with my words, to recognize that everything I said might be used as evidence of something. The trust pays for everything Wayne needs. And how do you feel about that arrangement? How did I feel? Grateful, dependent, erased, trapped in a situation where I couldn't afford to be anything but grateful. Sometimes it's hard to feel like his mother when I'm not involved in his daily care, I said. Dr. McKenna made a note in her file. Have you expressed this to your in-laws? A few times. They're very logical about it. My apartment isn't equipped for Wayne's needs. I work. They have the resources to provide better care. Better care than you could provide? I heard the trap in the question. If I said yes, I was admitting inadequacy. If I said no, I was being defensive and ungrateful. Either answer would be written down as evidence of something wrong with me. Different care, I said, more consistent, more professional. Do you feel you're being pushed out of your son's life? I don't know what I feel. I just want to be involved. Have they prevented you from being involved? Not prevented exactly. They just made it clear that my involvement created complications. My questions were challenges, my concerns were symptoms of instability. My desire to be consulted was evidence of control issues. No, I said. They've been very accommodating. We had 6 sessions over 6 weeks. Each one felt like a test I couldn't study for, or the questions were designed to reveal flaws I didn't know I had. Dr. McKenna asked about my childhood, my relationship with my parents, my marriage to Bruce, the divorce. She asked about my work history, my friendships, my support systems. She asked if I'd ever felt suicidal, if I'd ever experienced periods of depression, if I'd ever had thoughts of harming Wayne. No, I said to that last question, horror washing through me. Never. Why would you ask that? It's a standard question in custody evaluations, she said calmly. I ask everyone. But it didn't feel standard. It felt like she was looking for something specific, like someone had suggested she should ask. Dr. McKenna's report, which I was not initially shown, apparently concluded that I exhibited anxiety regarding control, difficulty accepting help, and patterns of questioning that suggested underlying trust issues. She recommended continued family therapy to address these concerns, but found no evidence that I posed a risk to Wayne's well-being. I learned about the report's contents because Loretta mentioned them during a conversation about Wayne's summer schedule. Dr. McKenna's assessment was very helpful, she said. We were in her living room, another perfectly decorated space with furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. Wayne was in his room with Sharon. It's clear you're struggling with accepting the support structure we've built, but the good news is she doesn't think you're unstable, just anxious. We can work with anxiety. I'd like to read the full report, I said. Of course. I'll have Douglas send you a copy, though I should mention the report is technically trust property since we commissioned it. But we want you to feel included in the process. The copy arrived a week later. Most of the clinical details were redacted, entire paragraphs blacked out. What remained was a summary of conclusions that made me sound fragile, possessive, and unable to recognize my own limitations. I added the report to my growing collection of documents. The notebook had evolved into a folder now, emails I'd saved, medical records I'd requested, notes from conversations. I kept it in a box under my bed, hidden like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed yet. I didn't know what I was building toward. I just knew that my memory of events kept diverging from the official narrative, and I needed proof that I wasn't imagining the divergence. Summer came. Loretta informed me that she'd enrolled Wayne in a camp for children with disabilities. It was a 6-week program in the San Gabriel Mountains, with adaptive equipment and trained medical staff. It cost $8,000. When were you planning to tell me about this? I asked. We were on the phone. I'd called after receiving a packet of information in the mail about what Wayne should bring to camp. I thought I mentioned it last month. Perhaps you forgot. I didn't forget. You never mentioned it. Well, it's arranged now. He'll benefit tremendously from the experience. Social interaction with peers, outdoor activities adapted for his needs. It's exactly what he needs for development. I should have been part of this decision. Janet. Loretta's voice took on that patient, explaining tone. You're welcome to be part of decisions, but you're not available during business hours when these programs need to be researched and arranged. I can't put Wayne's needs on hold, waiting for your schedule to align. You could have asked me in the evening, on weekends. I could have. But experience has shown that when I do that, you question the options I've already researched, and we end up having lengthy discussions that delay enrollment. Sometimes it's more efficient to simply handle things and inform you after. More efficient? For whom? I wanted to argue. I wanted to insist that efficiency wasn't the same as partnership, that informing me after wasn't the same as including me. But what was the point? The camp was booked. Wayne was going. Arguing would just add to the evidence that I was difficult. When does he leave? I asked. Sunday. I'll email you the information packet. Wayne went to camp. I visited him twice during those 6 weeks, the maximum allowed by the program. Each visit was scheduled, supervised, and limited to 4 hours. I saw my son in a structured environment where counselors monitored every interaction, where I couldn't take him anywhere alone, where even our conversations were technically overseen. He seemed happy enough. The camp was well run, the staff was competent, and Wayne was making progress with his physical therapy goals. But something about him seemed different, quieter, more withdrawn. When I mentioned this to the camp director, a woman named Teresa who'd been running the program for 15 years, she said Wayne was adjusting well and that what I was perceiving as withdrawal was probably just increasing independence. When I mentioned it to Loretta, she said I was projecting my own feelings of separation onto him. When I mentioned it to Dr. McKenna during a follow-up session, Loretta had insisted I continue therapy to work on my anxiety. She said it was normal for children to change as they developed and asked if I was perhaps having difficulty accepting Wayne's growth. I stopped mentioning it. Instead, I started documenting everything more carefully. I bought a small camera and began taking pictures during my visits. Nothing invasive, just documentation of Wayne's condition, his energy levels, his responsiveness. I compared current photos to ones from 6 months ago. A year ago. He was different, thinner, more lethargic. The changes were subtle enough that any individual observation could be dismissed, but the accumulated evidence showed a pattern. I started requesting Wayne's medical records directly from his providers. Under California law, I had a right to them as his parent. Some offices complied immediately. Others required multiple requests. A few claimed they needed authorization from the trust before releasing anything. I filed formal complaints with 2 offices that refused, cited the specific statutes that gave me access rights. Eventually, I got most of the records. What I saw disturbed me. Medication increases that were documented as discussed with parent but never discussed with me. Therapy sessions that were noted as canceled by parent request when I had requested no such thing. Incident reports describing Wayne as aggressive and resistant to care during periods when he seemed perfectly calm during my visits. Notations about parental anxiety affecting patient on days when I hadn't even been present. I was looking at a parallel record of my son's life, one that didn't match reality. Or at least didn't match my reality. In October, Wayne developed a respiratory infection that required hospitalization. I received a call from Loretta at 11 p.m. informing me that he'd been admitted 3 hours earlier. I didn't want to worry you until we knew it was serious, she said. But you should probably come. I drove to Huntington Hospital in my pajamas, breaking every speed limit between Glendale and Pasadena. Wayne was in a pediatric ICU room, oxygen mask over his face, IV in his thin arm. Loretta was sitting beside his bed looking exhausted and worried. For a moment, I almost felt sympathy for her. They think it's pneumonia, she said when I arrived. They're starting antibiotics. I sat on Wayne's other side and held his hand. He was sleeping. His breathing labored even with the oxygen. His skin felt hot and dry. I stayed all night, leaving only when my supervisor called at 7 a.m. to ask where I was. My son is in the hospital, I said. I'm very sorry to hear that. Will you be able to make your afternoon shift? I looked at Wayne, at the monitors tracking his vitals, at Loretta watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I'll try, I said. I stayed until noon, then drove home to change and went to work. I called the hospital every hour for updates. Loretta assured me Wayne was stable, that there was nothing I could do by being there, that she would contact me immediately if anything changed. He was in the hospital for 6 days. I visited every evening after work and spent the Isles weekends by his bedside. Loretta was there more than I was. She had arranged her schedule. She didn't work, so she had a schedule to arrange, to be present for all medical updates, all conversations with doctors. I was getting information secondhand, filtered through her summaries. On the 4th day, a doctor I hadn't met before came to discuss Wayne's care plan. His name was Dr. Lawrence Shepard, and he specialized in pulmonology for children with complex needs. Loretta was there. I was not. I'd gone to the cafeteria for coffee because I'd been up since 5 a.m. and needed caffeine to function. When I returned 15 minutes later, Loretta told me they'd decided to place a feeding tube. Wayne's nutritional intake had been declining, and the pneumonia had revealed how fragile his baseline health was. A gastrostomy tube would ensure adequate nutrition and reduce his aspiration risk. A feeding tube? I said. That's a major decision. It's necessary. The doctor explained it very clearly. Wayne's aspiration risk is too high with oral feeding. The pneumonia was likely caused by aspiration. This will prevent future episodes. I should have been here for that conversation. You were getting coffee, Janet. We couldn't wait. The doctor had other patients, but I took detailed notes. Would you like to review them? I wanted to scream that notes weren't the same as being present, that I should have been called back immediately, that decisions about surgically altering my son's body shouldn't be made without me in the room. Instead, I read Loretta's notes. They were thorough, organized, typed on her iPad, and printed out for me. The feeding tube was medically necessary. Dr. Shepard had recommended it strongly. Wayne's weight had dropped 12% over the past year. His aspiration risk was documented and serious. All of this was news to me. I hadn't known his weight was dropping. I hadn't been informed about aspiration concerns, but the evidence was there in Loretta's notes, and how could I argue with medical necessity? When will they do the surgery? I asked. Tomorrow morning. I've already signed the consent forms. You signed? I'm his mother. Loretta's expression shifted slightly. Janet, the trust has medical power of attorney. We discussed this when you signed the initial documents. I have the legal authority to make these decisions. I had signed documents years ago when Wayne was 3 and I was drowning, but I didn't remember signing away my right to make medical decisions. I remembered agreeing to let them manage his care, his expenses, his schedule, not his body. I want to see those documents, I said. Of course. I'll have Douglas send copies. But Janet, This is exactly the kind of reaction that concerns us. Wayne needs this procedure. It's not optional. Questioning it at this stage doesn't help him. I signed the surgical consent form because the alternative was admitting I'd signed away my rights 4 years ago, without fully understanding what I was agreeing to. Wayne's surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m. I arrived at 5:30 before visiting hours and convinced a nurse to let me sit with him. He was groggy from the pre-op sedation, but he knew I was there. He squeezed my hand. "I love you," I whispered. "You're going to be okay." The surgery took 90 minutes. Wayne came out with a tube protruding from his abdomen, bandages covering the surgical site, and new care requirements that would change everything about how he ate. Loretta had already arranged for Sharon to receive specialized training in G-tube management. She'd already ordered the supplies, feeding bags, syringes, nutritional formula. She'd already integrated this new reality into Wayne's care plan. I learned about it all after it was arranged. Wayne came home to Loretta's house with the feeding tube in place and new care requirements that I didn't know how to manage. Sharon showed me the basics: how to administer his nutrition, how to clean the site, how to recognize signs of infection. But it was clear I was being instructed, not included. I was being taught to follow protocols someone else had established. "Perhaps it's best if Sharon handles the technical care," Loretta suggested one evening. We were in Wayne's room, and I'd just struggled with connecting the feeding bag properly. "You can focus on spending quality time with him." Quality time? The phrase made my jaw clench, but she was right that I wasn't confident with the feeding tube, that I was afraid of making a mistake that would hurt him, that my hands shook when I tried to clean the stoma site. I delegated the technical care to Sharon and focused on reading Wayne's stories, playing adaptive games with him, being present in the ways that didn't require medical expertise. I was being trained to be a visitor in my son's life, and I was cooperating with my own marginalization. In November, my supervisor, Teresa, called me into her office. She'd been patient with my schedule complications for 2 years. Her patience was ending. "Janet, I need to be direct with you," she said. We were in the small office she used for employee reviews, a space that always smelled like the vanilla candle she burned to mask the building's mustiness. "Your attendance has become unreliable. You've missed 14 days in the past 3 months. You've asked to leave early 12 times. I've received complaints from other staff about inconsistent coverage of shared duties. I can't continue to accommodate this schedule." "My son has complex medical needs," I said. "He was hospitalized. He had surgery. I understand, and I've been very flexible. But you need to make a choice about whether this position is sustainable for you, given your personal circumstances." She was giving me an ultimatum: improve my attendance or find another job. I went home and looked at my finances. I made $18 an hour, working 20 hours a week. After taxes, the cost of gas to drive between my apartment, work, and San Marino, and the parking fees downtown, I was clearing about $1,100 a month. My rent was $900. I was working myself into exhaustion for $200 of margin. And that margin was the only thing that made me feel like an independent person rather than a dependent managed by Loretta's trust. I started looking for remote work, something I could do from home, with a flexible schedule that would allow me to visit Wayne without sacrificing employment. I found a few possibilities: medical billing for a company that served multiple practices, customer service for a software company, data entry for an insurance firm. None paid as well as my current job. Most paid less. But they would eliminate the commute and give me more control over my hours. I applied to 7 positions. I received 3 rejections almost immediately. Automated emails thanking me for my interest. 4. Sent automated acknowledgments that my application was under review. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Loretta called me. We need to discuss Wayne's holiday schedule. I was hoping he could spend Thanksgiving with me, I said. Just the 2 of us. There was a pause. That's sweet, but realistically, how would you manage his care for an entire day? His feeding schedule alone requires administration every 4 hours. His medications, his positioning needs. It would be overwhelming for you. Sharon could come, I could pay her overtime. Could you? Loretta's tone was gentle, not challenging, which somehow made it worse. I know you're already stretched financially, and Sharon deserves to have Thanksgiving with her own family. Why don't you come here? We'll have a lovely dinner together. Bruce is bringing Elaine. It'll be nice to have everyone together. We, Loretta, Gerald, Bruce, and Bruce's new wife, Elaine, a woman I'd met twice, once at Wayne's birthday party, once at the hospital during his pneumonia admission, who was now part of Wayne's life because she'd married his father. Bruce is bringing Elaine, I asked. Of course, she's family now. And Janet, I think it's important that Wayne sees his parents being civil, that he knows we can all come together for his sake. His sake. Everything was for Wayne's sake, and questioning what was supposedly for Wayne's sake made you the problem. I went to the Thanksgiving dinner. I sat at Loretta's dining room table, a table that seated 12 easily with a view of the garden through French doors. And I watched Bruce cut Wayne's turkey into tiny pieces that would be blended for his feeding tube. I watched Elaine wipe Wayne's mouth when he drooled. I watched Loretta coordinate every aspect of the meal with effortless competence. Gerald said grace. He thanked God for family, for health, for the opportunity to serve those who needed care. He specifically thanked God for allowing them to provide for Wayne. I sat at the table and felt like a ghost. After dinner, I asked if I could put Wayne to bed. It was something I used to do every night, his bedtime routine, his favorite songs, the specific way he liked his blankets arranged. I knew that routine intimately, or I used to. Sharon usually handles that, Loretta said. She knows his routine now. I know his routine. I'm his mother. The room got quiet. Bruce looked at his plate. Gerald looked at Loretta. Elaine looked uncomfortable. My mother, who'd driven down for dinner, suddenly became very interested in her coffee. Of course you can put him to bed, Loretta said finally. Her voice was gracious, accommodating. Though you might find his routine has evolved, Sharon can walk you through the current process. The current process involved 3 medications administered through the G-tube, 2 positioning devices to prevent pressure sores, a specialized mattress with controls I'd never seen, and a monitoring system that tracked his breathing and heart rate through sensors attached to his body. Sharon supervised while I attempted to navigate equipment I didn't recognize in my son's bedroom. I fumbled with the mattress controls. I couldn't remember which medication went first. I wasn't sure how tight the positioning straps should be. It's okay, Sharon said when I struggled for the 3rd time. It takes practice. Here, let me show you. She took over. I stood back and watched her put my son to bed with practiced efficiency while I stood there like an observer, like someone who'd wandered into a stranger's house. I drove home at 9 p.m. and sat in my car outside my apartment building for 20 minutes, trying to remember when I'd stopped being essential to Wayne's life, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when I'd become optional. December brought 3 things: a job offer for remote medical billing, another letter from Douglas Carver, and Bruce's announcement that he and Elaine were expecting a baby. The job offer came from a company called Med Billing Solutions. They served multiple practices across California and needed people to process claims remotely. $14 an hour, flexible scheduling, completely remote. It was a pay cut, but it meant I could work from my apartment and visit Wayne whenever I wanted without requesting time off. I accepted it and gave my 2 weeks' notice to Teresa. She looked relieved. The letter from Douglas Carver arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy paper, formal language, the kind of document that felt important just by existing. It informed me that the trust was petitioning for formal guardianship of Wayne. The petition cited my inability to provide consistent care, documented emotional instability, pattern of decision-making that prioritizes parental authority over the child's medical needs, and lack of practical involvement in the minor's daily care requirements. They were trying to take legal custody of my son. I read the letter 3 times, then I called Loretta. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was shaking. "You're petitioning for guardianship?" "Janet, this is a formality. It's about ensuring Wayne has stable legal representation for medical decisions. Nothing about your relationship with him has to change." "Nothing has to change? You're trying to take custody." "Not custody. Guardianship, it's different. You'll still be his mother. You'll still have visitation. But the trust needs clear legal authority to make decisions without potential challenges." "Challenges from me? You mean if I disagree with you?" "Disagreement is natural, but when disagreement delays necessary medical care, it becomes a problem. The guardianship simply clarifies the decision-making structure." "I don't agree to this." "You don't have to agree. That's what the court process is for. But Janet, I'd encourage you to think about what's best for Wayne. Fighting this will be expensive, stressful, and ultimately, the court will likely grant guardianship anyway, given the care structure that's already in place. Wouldn't it be better to work together rather than force this into litigation?" The threat was clear. Fight and lose. Surrender and maintain some illusion of involvement. I hung up without answering. Bruce's announcement came during a Sunday visit. He arrived with Elaine, both of them glowing with the news that they were having a daughter. Elaine was 4 months along, just starting to show. They'd waited to tell people until they were past the risky first trimester. "We're so excited," Elaine said. Her hand rested on her barely visible bump, that unconscious gesture of protective motherhood. "And Wayne will be such a good example for his little sister." I looked at Wayne in his wheelchair, at his communication tablet, at the feeding tube port visible beneath his shirt. At my son, who would never run or jump or do any of the things his new half-sister would take for granted. "Example of what?" I asked. The question came out harder than I intended. Sharper. Elaine's smile faltered. Bruce's expression shifted to something defensive. "Of strength," Elaine said quietly. "Of resilience. Of how people overcome challenges." I wanted to tell her that Wayne wasn't a symbol of anything, that he was a child who deserved to be known as a person, not an inspiration for able-bodied people to feel good about themselves. That being disabled wasn't a character lesson for his future sibling. But Loretta was watching me with that expression again, the one that suggested I was being difficult, emotional, proving their concerns right. I congratulated them and said nothing else. That night, I read the guardianship petition in full. It was 16 pages of documentation outlining my failures as a parent, my inconsistent employment history, my documented anxiety and trust issues from Dr. McKenna's evaluation, my questioning of medical decisions made by qualified professionals, my inability to manage Wayne's technical care needs. testimony from Sharon about my lack of familiarity with his current care requirements, testimony from Bruce about my deteriorating emotional state following our divorce. They were building a case that I was unfit, not abusive, that would be too easy to disprove, just incapable, too unstable, too impractical, too emotional to be trusted with decisions about my son's welfare. I called an attorney the next morning. Her name was Linda Pritchard, and she specialized in family law. Her office was in Burbank, close enough to my apartment that I could get there easily. The consultation was free, which was good because I couldn't afford to pay for one. I explained the situation, the trust, the systematic exclusion, the guardianship petition. Linda listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. "Do you have documentation?" she asked when I finished. I thought about my box under the bed, the notebook that had become a file, the file that had become a collection of records spanning 4 years. "Yes," I said, "I have documentation. Bring everything to my office. We'll review it together." I brought 4 years of evidence to Linda's office 2 days later. 2 boxes full of notebooks, printed emails, medical records, photographs, a spreadsheet I'd started maintaining that tracked Wayne's documented appointments versus the ones I actually knew about. Linda spent 3 hours reviewing it while I sat across from her desk, drinking bad coffee from her office machine, and watching her expression shift from professional interest to genuine concern. "Janet, this is a textbook pattern of parental alienation," she said finally. "They've systematically excluded you from decision-making while documenting your exclusion as evidence of your incompetence. This is actually actionable. Can we fight the guardianship petition? We can fight it, but I need to be honest with you about something." Linda leaned back in her chair, studying me. "These cases are difficult. The trust has resources you don't have. They've established a care structure that objectively benefits Wayne. He's receiving excellent medical care. He's in a safe environment. His needs are being met. Courts are reluctant to disrupt arrangements that are working, even if the process of establishing them was problematic. So they win. Not necessarily, but we need to be strategic. We need to demonstrate not just that you're a capable parent, but that their current arrangement is actively harmful to Wayne's relationship with you. That requires evidence of their intent to exclude you, not just the outcome of exclusion." I thought about 4 years of casual conversations, gentle suggestions, concerned warnings. Loretta had been very careful never to explicitly exclude me. She'd just made inclusion progressively more difficult until I'd excluded myself. "I don't have evidence of intent," I said. "Just results." "Then we need to create circumstances that force them to show their intent. We need to make reasonable requests for involvement and document their responses. We need to position you as someone attempting to engage and them as people blocking that engagement." "How?" Linda pulled out a legal pad. "You start asking for specific things in writing. You request to attend medical appointments in writing with specific dates. You volunteer to take Wayne for weekend visits in writing with specific plans. You ask to be added to email chains about his care. You request copies of all medical records, all therapy reports, all educational plans. And when they say no, if they say no, you document it. Every refusal becomes evidence. And if they say yes, then you get what you wanted, more involvement with your son. Either outcome is a win." It sounded simple. It felt like a trap I was setting for myself, where success meant proving I was already doing enough, and failure meant confirming I was inadequate. But it was the only option I had. I started that week. I sent Loretta a formal email requesting Wayne's complete schedule for the month. Not the simplified version she usually provided, but the full calendar with every appointment, therapy session, and care task. I asked to be present for his next neurologist appointment and provided 3 dates I was available. I volunteered to take Wayne to my apartment for a Saturday visit and outlined my plan for managing his care needs. Loretta's responses were prompt and polite. She provided a partial schedule, explaining that the full version included confidential medical information managed by the trust and Sharon's personal schedule, which we can't share for privacy reasons. She noted that the neurologist appointment was during business hours when I would normally be working and suggested it might be better if she attended and shared detailed notes afterward, rather than requiring me to take time off from my new job. She expressed concern about my apartment's accessibility for an all-day visit, but suggested I could take Wayne to the nearby park for a few hours with Sharon accompanying us to handle technical care needs. Every response was a no disguised as a yes. Every refusal came wrapped in concern for my convenience or Wayne's needs. I documented them all. I saved every email, printed them, added them to my boxes. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for February. Linda filed a response contesting the petition and requesting increased parental involvement as an alternative to guardianship. She argued that the trust had systematically excluded me while using that exclusion as evidence of my inadequacy, a circular logic that violated my parental rights. The judge ordered a custody evaluation, a comprehensive assessment of Wayne's living situation, his relationship with me, and the appropriateness of the current care arrangement. The evaluation would be conducted by a court-appointed psychologist who would interview everyone involved and make a recommendation to the court. The evaluator was a man named Keith Yates. He had an office in Pasadena and a reputation for thorough, unbiased assessments. Over 3 weeks, he interviewed everyone: me, Loretta, Gerald, Bruce, Elaine, Sharon, Dr. McKenna, Wayne's teachers, his therapists, his doctors. He observed Wayne in Loretta's house and in my apartment. He reviewed all medical and educational records. He assessed the quality of care in each setting. My interview with him lasted 4 hours. He asked about my relationship with Wayne, my work history, my ability to manage his care needs. He asked about the trust, about Loretta and Gerald, about whether I felt they'd acted in Wayne's best interests. I think they believe they're acting in his best interests, I said carefully. But I don't think they've acted in mine, and I'm not convinced those things should be separate. What do you mean? Wayne needs a mother who's empowered and involved, not one who's been systematically marginalized. I think they've confused controlling his care with providing good care, and I think they've prioritized their own comfort and authority over my relationship with my son. Keith made notes. Do you have evidence of this marginalization? I did. I showed him my documentation, the emails, the medical records showing decisions I wasn't consulted on, the photographs showing the difference in Wayne's appearance over time, the financial records I'd requested that showed the trust's expenses. He spent an hour reviewing it all. This is quite comprehensive, he said. I'm a bookkeeper. Documentation is what I do. His report was completed in mid-January. Linda received a copy first and called me immediately. The report is neutral, she said, which is better than it could have been, but not as good as we needed. She read me the key conclusions. Wayne received excellent care through the trust arrangement. I demonstrated genuine love for my son, but limited practical involvement in his daily needs. Both parties appeared to have Wayne's best interests at heart, though with different philosophical approaches to his care. Keith recommended either maintaining the current arrangement with some modifications to increase my involvement, or implementing a gradual transition plan that would give me more responsibility over time. Gradual transition, I said. What does that mean? It means they keep control, but you get more access. It means the court doesn't change the fundamental power structure, but requires them to include you more. It's a compromise. I don't want a compromise. I want my son. I know. But Janet, the reality is that we might not win full custody. The trust can afford better lawyers, more experts, more everything, and Wayne's care is objectively good. You need to consider whether fighting for all or nothing might result in nothing. The hearing was scheduled for early February. I spent weeks preparing with Linda, going over every detail of my testimony, every piece of evidence we'd present. We had a strategy: show the pattern of exclusion, demonstrate my capability, argue that emotional bonds matter as much as financial resources. But strategies require resources too. Linda's retainer for a contested guardianship case was $15,000. I had $1,800 in savings. She agreed to reduce her fee to work out a payment plan. But even the reduced rate was more than I could afford while paying rent and covering my basic expenses. I sat in Linda's office a week before the hearing and said, "What happens if I agree to shared guardianship?" Linda set down her pen. Shared guardianship would formalize the current arrangement. The trust would maintain primary decision-making authority, but you'd retain some parental rights. You'd be consulted on major decisions, though consulted doesn't mean you'd have final say. You'd have guaranteed visitation rights. You'd maintain your legal status as his mother. But not custody. No, not custody. I thought about Wayne, in his wheelchair, about the life we'd had before the trust, before Bruce left, before I'd signed documents I didn't fully understand because I was desperate and afraid. If I fight this and lose, could they take away visitation? Linda hesitated. Theoretically, if the court grants full guardianship to the trust, they could petition to restrict your access. I don't think they would. It would look bad, and judges don't like separating children from parents without serious cause. But they could argue that unsupervised visits create instability for Wayne, given your documented anxiety and the complexity of his care needs. I was trapped. Fight and risk losing everything. Surrender and formalize my own erasure. I need to think about it, I said. I drove to San Marino that afternoon without calling first. It was a Thursday mid-afternoon. Sharon answered the door, looking surprised to see me. "Mrs. Hawkins isn't home," she said. "She's at a meeting with Wayne's school." "I'm here to see Wayne." Of course, he's in the sunroom. Wayne was working with his tablet, playing some kind of educational game that involved matching shapes. He smiled when he saw me, immediately setting aside the game to greet me. I sat on the floor beside his wheelchair and held his hand. He used his tablet to tell me about his day, therapy session, lunch, game time, simple things that made up his life in this house. "I'm sorry," I whispered to him. "I'm so sorry." For what? I wasn't sure. For signing the trust documents, for not being able to afford the care he needed, for loving him but not being enough, for letting other people tell me I wasn't enough until I believed it. Sharon stayed in the room while I visited. She always did now, another policy that had emerged without announcement, without discussion. I was never alone with my son in the house where he lived. I stayed for 2 hours. When I left, I drove to a coffee shop in Pasadena and sat in my car in the parking lot and finally let myself acknowledge what I'd been avoiding for 4 years. They were going to win. Not because they were right, but because they had resources and I had exhaustion. because the system rewarded whoever could afford better lawyers, better evaluations, better documentation of someone else's inadequacy. I went home and looked at my evidence boxes. 4 years of carefully documented exclusion. Proof that I'd been pushed out of my son's life incrementally, politely, with concern for my emotional well-being and Wayne's best interests. Proof that would be reframed as evidence of my own paranoia, my trust issues, my inability to accept help gracefully. I thought about the hearing, about sitting in front of a judge while Douglas Carver outlined every decision the trust had made for Wayne's benefit. Every medication adjustment, every therapy session, every piece of equipment purchased with trust funds. About watching my own attorney try to argue that love should matter more than money, that maternal bonds should count for something even when they couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. I was going to lose, unless I changed what I was fighting for. I spent that night reading through every document in my boxes with new eyes, not looking for evidence of exclusion, but for evidence of something else. Discrepancies. Wayne's medication records showed increases in dosages that coincided with periods when I'd questioned other decisions. His aggressive behaviors were only documented during times when I wasn't present. His therapy progress reports showed dramatic improvements that I never observed during my visits. Improvements that should have been visible, but somehow only existed on paper. The feeding tube had been placed after I'd started requesting detailed medical records, as if they needed a more complex care situation to justify my exclusion. I pulled every financial document I'd managed to obtain, receipts from the trust for Wayne's care, expense reports I'd been copied on after I'd started asking questions, invoices for services, and I started comparing them. The trust paid Sharon $48,000 a year. It paid for Wayne's specialized mattress, $9,000 according to the receipt. His wheelchair, $12,000. His custom communication tablet, $6,000. His medications should have cost roughly $18,000 a year based on the prescriptions I'd seen and the prices I could find online. The trust's annual expense reports showed $54,000 in pharmaceutical costs. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I started cross-referencing everything. Medication records against expense reports. Therapy sessions documented as attended against invoices for services. Equipment purchased according to trust accounting against what actually existed in Wayne's environment. I worked until 3 a.m., building a spreadsheet, highlighting discrepancies, noting patterns. I wasn't a forensic accountant, but I'd been managing accounts payable for a decade, and I knew what irregular spending looked like. I knew how to track expenses, how to identify overbilling, how to spot when numbers didn't add up. The trust was inflating Wayne's care costs. Not dramatically. Nothing that would trigger an automatic audit. Just small overages across multiple categories. Extra medication that was documented but didn't match actual prescriptions. Therapy sessions billed at premium rates that didn't align with session frequency. Equipment purchases that appeared twice in different fiscal years. It added up to tens of thousands of dollars a year disappearing into the gap between documented expenses and actual services provided. I sat back and looked at my spreadsheet and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about love or gratitude or what was best for Wayne. This was about money. The trust was funded by Bruce's inheritance from his grandfather. $2 million designated specifically for any grandchildren's medical needs. Gerald's father had been wealthy, had wanted to ensure that future generations would be cared for. The trust was irrevocable, protected, designated solely for Wayne's benefit. Loretta and Gerald managed it with complete discretion. They were required only to maintain assets for Wayne's benefit and document expenses. No outside audits, no oversight except their own integrity. And somewhere along the way, they'd started taking more than they needed. Maybe it started small, an expense slightly inflated, a service billed at a higher rate than actually paid, small enough to rationalize, to justify as administrative costs or compensation for their time. But it had grown. Over 4 years, I could trace a pattern of increasing discrepancies. More services documented than Wayne actually received. More equipment purchased than actually existed. More medication billed than Wayne actually used. They'd built a system where they controlled every aspect of Wayne's care, every relationship he had, every dollar spent on his behalf, with no oversight except their own conscience. And they'd made sure I couldn't access the information that would reveal what they were doing. The guardianship petition made perfect sense now. It wasn't about protecting Wayne from me. It was about protecting their access to Wayne's trust fund. If I had any legal authority, I could request audits. I could demand accounting. I could expose what they'd been doing. Excluding me wasn't about care philosophy or emotional stability. It was about eliminating the one person who had both motive and legal standing to look closely at their financial management. I sat with this knowledge for 3 days. I didn't tell Linda. I didn't confront Loretta. I just sat with the understanding that everything, the psychological evaluation, the systematic exclusion, the guardianship petition, was about money. They'd stolen from my son and made me believe I was the problem. On the 4th day, I made copies of everything. The financial records, the medication discrepancies, the documented services that didn't match actual care provided, the equipment purchases that didn't align with physical reality. I created a parallel file that told a different story than the one Loretta had been telling the court. Then I called Linda. "I need to show you something," I said. "Can I come to your office today?" 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Linda, watching her review my financial analysis. She was quiet for a long time, flipping through pages, checking my calculations, comparing documents. "Janet," she said finally, "if you're right about this, this is financial abuse. This is theft from a disabled minor's trust fund. This is serious. I know. But you need to understand what happens if we pursue this. You'll be accusing your former in-laws of stealing from their disabled grandson. It will destroy any remaining relationship you have with them. It will turn the guardianship hearing into a criminal matter. And it will affect Wayne. If this goes to court, his care could be disrupted during the investigation. He might be removed from Loretta's house, placed temporarily with foster care while the state investigates and new guardianship is established." I hadn't thought about that. The idea of Wayne in foster care, away from everyone familiar, surrounded by strangers trying to manage his complex needs without the benefit of years of relationship. "What's the alternative?" I asked. "You could present the evidence privately. Give them an opportunity to address the discrepancies and return the misappropriated funds. Renegotiate the guardianship arrangement in exchange for not pursuing legal action. That's blackmail. That's negotiation. You have leverage now. The question is whether you want to use it to destroy them or to change the power dynamic." I thought about Loretta's patient smile when she explained why I couldn't be trusted with decisions about my son. Gerald's frank discussion of my emotional instability. Bruce's testimony about my deteriorating state. Dr. McKenna's evaluation that framed my reasonable concerns as symptoms of mental health issues. 4 years of being told I was inadequate while they systematically excluded me and took money meant for Wayne's care. "I want my son back," I said. Linda nodded. Then let's draft a proposal. We spent the next week building the case. Linda had a colleague who specialized in trust law review the financial documents. He confirmed my analysis. There were significant discrepancies between reported expenses and reasonable costs for the services documented. Not enough to prove theft beyond reasonable doubt in a criminal case, but more than enough to raise serious questions about financial management. The proposal was simple and devastating. Immediate termination of the shared guardianship arrangement. Full custody returned to me. The trust would continue to fund Wayne's care, but I would have final authority over all medical and educational decisions. Loretta and Gerald would step down as trustees, replaced by an independent fiduciary who would provide quarterly reports to both me and the court. They would also repay documented overcharges to the trust, an amount we calculated at $63,000 over 4 years. In exchange, I would not pursue legal action regarding the financial discrepancies. I would not file complaints with the California Attorney General's Office or Adult Protective Services. I would not seek criminal charges. It was their choice. Return what they'd taken and give me back my son, or face investigation and potential prosecution. We sent the proposal to Douglas Carver with a cover letter outlining the evidence I'd collected. The letter noted that I was prepared to file complaints with multiple agencies if the proposal was rejected, and that those complaints would include detailed financial documentation showing systematic overbilling and misappropriation of funds. I received a response within 24 hours requesting a meeting. Loretta, Gerald, Douglas, Linda, and I sat in a conference room in Douglas's downtown LA office on a Tuesday afternoon in January. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather chairs, a table that could seat 20 people. Everything about the space was designed to intimidate. No one was smiling. Douglas opened the meeting. My clients are deeply troubled by the accusations in your proposal. The financial management of Wayne's Trust has been exemplary and above reproach. Any perceived discrepancies are likely the result of accounting complexities that a layperson might misinterpret. I've worked in accounting for 12 years, I said. My voice was steady. I'd practiced this. These aren't complexities. They're overbilling and misreporting, equipment purchased twice, medications billed at quantities that don't match, prescriptions, therapy sessions documented at rates that don't align with actual service delivery. You're not a forensic accountant, Douglas said. No, but I can hire one, and I can provide all my documentation to Adult Protective Services and the Attorney General's office and let them hire one. California takes financial exploitation of vulnerable adults and children very seriously. Loretta spoke for the first time. Her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. Janet, this is vindictive. We've given Wayne everything he needs. We've provided care you couldn't afford. We've dedicated 4 years of our lives to ensuring he receives the best possible treatment. And now you're manufacturing a crisis because you couldn't handle sharing guardianship. I'm not manufacturing anything. You've been taking money meant for Wayne and documenting it as expenses that don't exist. That's theft. That's a serious accusation, Gerald said. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. One that could constitute slander if you're wrong. I'm not wrong, and it's only slander if I say it publicly without evidence. Right now, I'm saying it privately with extensive documentation. Linda spoke up. My client is offering you a very generous resolution. You return the misappropriated funds, step down as trustees, and allow the custody arrangement to be corrected. In exchange, no public disclosure, no criminal complaints, no investigation that would damage your professional reputations. This is a far better outcome for you than the alternative." "And if we refuse?" Loretta asked. I looked at her directly. The woman who'd welcomed me into her family, who'd held my hand at Wayne's diagnosis, who'd promised to help. The woman who'd used my desperation against me for 4 years. Then I file complaints with APS, the State Attorney General's office, and the court that approved the guardianship arrangement. I provide all evidence of financial discrepancies and request a full forensic audit of the trust. Wayne's care gets disrupted anyway. He'll likely be placed in temporary foster care during the investigation. But you also get investigated for financial exploitation of a disabled minor, which in California can result in both civil and criminal penalties. Gerald's legal license would be subject to review. Your reputations would be destroyed, and you'd lose access to Wayne permanently. The room was silent. Douglas conferred quietly with Loretta and Gerald. The conversation lasted nearly 15 minutes. Whispered arguments, documents passed back and forth, occasional glances in my direction. Linda sat beside me, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral. She'd warned me this could go badly, that they might call my bluff, that they might have explanations for the discrepancies that made me look paranoid again. But I wasn't bluffing anymore. I had the documentation. I had expert review confirming my analysis. I had evidence that would survive scrutiny, and I had nothing left to lose. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, Douglas spoke. "My clients are willing to consider a modified arrangement, not full custody. That would be too disruptive to Wayne's established routine, but expanded decision-making authority for you, with the trust maintaining a consultative role, and they're willing to address any legitimate financial concerns through an independent review rather than through public complaint processes." "No," I said. "Full custody or investigation. Those are the only options." "Janet," Gerald started, "you spent 4 years telling me I was too unstable to make decisions about my son. You commissioned a psychological evaluation that diagnosed me with trust issues. You petitioned for guardianship based on documented evidence of my inadequacy. You built an entire case that I was incapable, and the whole time you were stealing from him." "We were not stealing," Loretta said sharply. "Every dollar spent was for Wayne's benefit." "Then you'll have no problem with the forensic audit proving that." Another silence, longer this time. I watched Loretta's face, the careful mask of composure starting to crack. Gerald was calculating, I could see it, running the numbers on what an investigation would cost them versus what surrender would cost. Finally, Loretta spoke. Her voice was quiet, defeated. "What happens to our relationship with Wayne if we agree to your terms? That's up to you. You can be his grandparents who made mistakes and corrected them, or you can be the people who lost access because they refused to be accountable. Your choice. You're being cruel. I'm being clear, maybe for the first time in 4 years." We negotiated for another 2 hours. The final agreement gave me full legal and physical custody, with the trust continuing to fund Wayne's care under the management of an independent fiduciary appointed by the court. Loretta and Gerald would have supervised. Visitation rights, 4 hours every other Sunday, but no decision-making authority. All previous guardianship orders would be vacated. They would repay $63,000 in documented overcharges to the trust within 90 days, with payment verified by the independent fiduciary. The agreement included confidentiality clauses. I wouldn't pursue criminal charges or file public complaints as long as they complied with the terms. They wouldn't contest my custody or make disparaging statements about my capabilities. I signed the agreement. They signed. Douglas witnessed with visible distaste. Linda smiled. I walked out of that conference room and sat in my car in the parking garage for 30 minutes, shaking so badly I couldn't grip the steering wheel. I'd won. Wayne moved back to my apartment 6 weeks later. The delay was necessary for modifications. I'd used an advance from the trust to make my apartment accessible. The landlord hadn't been happy about the construction, but California law was on my side. A ramp at the entrance, a roll-in shower, wider doorways, a bedroom large enough for Wayne's equipment. Sharon agreed to continue as his aide, now employed directly by me rather than through the trust. Her salary came from Wayne's care fund, managed by the new fiduciary, a woman named Yvonne Whitmore who had 20 years of experience in special needs trust management. Bruce called the night before Wayne moved home. "I need you to know this is going to hurt him," he said. "Disrupting his routine, moving him away from the house he knows, the environment he's comfortable in. He's been stable there. He'll be stable here, too. Mom is devastated. You've destroyed her relationship with her grandson. Your mother destroyed her own relationship. I just stopped letting her use Wayne as a personal bank account. That's not fair. She loves him. She loved controlling him. Those aren't the same thing." Bruce was quiet for a moment. "Elaine thinks I should support you in this, that you deserve custody. But I need you to know that if Wayne's care declines in any measurable way, I'll petition for custody myself. Then you'd better hope his care doesn't decline." I hung up. Wayne's first night home, I put him to bed myself. His routine had changed since I'd done this regularly. New medications, new equipment, new comfort preferences. But Sharon walked me through everything patiently, and by the end of the first week, I was managing his care without constant supervision. He seemed happy, more animated during meals, more engaged with his communication tablet, more responsive during our time together. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years, without the filter of someone else's interpretation. Maybe we were both adjusting to living in the truth instead of someone else's carefully constructed narrative. Loretta requested her first visitation in March, 6 weeks after Wayne came home. She arrived exactly on time, dressed perfectly, carrying an expensive gift bag containing toys Wayne was too old for. She sat in my small living room and played with Wayne while I watched from the kitchen. She was gentle with him, attentive, everything a grandmother should be. But there was something performative about it, something conscious and controlled. After 2 hours, she left. She didn't ask to extend her time. She didn't comment on the apartment or Wayne's care. She thanked me politely for allowing the visit. Gerald never requested visitation. I heard through my mother, who still spoke with Loretta occasionally, that he felt betrayed, that he couldn't understand how I'd turned his generosity against him. Dr. McKenna sent a letter 3 months after Wayne came home, recommending family therapy to process the transition and repair damaged relationships. I declined through Linda, noting that I'd be happy to participate in therapy that focused on building new, honest relationships going forward, but I had no interest in repairing what had been broken on purpose. Bruce and Elaine had their daughter in September. They named her Ruth. I sent a card with a thoughtful note and a small gift. Bruce called to thank me, and we had a brief civil conversation about co-parenting and ensuring Wayne had a relationship with his half-sister. It was more honest than any conversation we'd had in years. I still work in medical billing from home, still make less than I did before. But Wayne's trust covers his care expenses, and I make enough to cover rent, food, basic expenses. I'm not wealthy. I'm not financially secure. But I'm autonomous in a way I haven't been since I signed those first documents 4 years ago. I've started teaching Wayne cooking skills using adaptive tools. He can't use his hands well, but he can direct me, use his communication tablet to tell me what ingredients he wants, what flavors he likes, what he wants to try. He participates in creating meals even if he can't eat most of them in the traditional way. We blend his portion for the feeding tube, but he knows he helped make it. Last month he spelled out "Happy Home Mama" on his tablet. I cried for an hour. Linda called me a few months after the settlement to check in. "How are you managing?" "We're managing. It's harder than I expected in some ways, easier in others, different." "And Loretta?" "She's very civil during visits, very careful, very controlled. I think she's waiting for me to fail so she can say she was right all along." "Are you going to fail?" "No." "Good." Linda paused. "You know, when you first came to my office, I wasn't sure you'd follow through. A lot of people in your situation give up when they realize how hard it is to fight people with resources and institutional support. They convince themselves that accepting less is the same as being practical. I almost did give up." "What changed?" I thought about sitting in Loretta's living room watching elephants migrate while holding my son's hand, about the moment I understood that gratitude had become a weapon used against me, about counting receipts in the middle of the night and finding the truth in the margins. I stopped being grateful, I said. For the help they provided? For the help they said they were providing. Turns out there's a difference between actual help and a system designed to make you feel like you need specific people who benefit from your dependence. Linda laughed. "You should write that down. Might help someone else." Maybe. Or maybe my situation was specific enough that the lessons didn't translate. But I think about it sometimes. The women out there who are being told they should be grateful, that they're too emotional, that they need to trust others to make decisions they're too unstable to handle. I want them to know that gratitude can be a cage, that acceptance is sometimes just exhaustion wearing a different mask, that the people who say they're helping might be the ones who need your silence most. I want them to know that documentation matters, that evidence matters, that watching and recording and keeping your own version of events can be the difference between being erased and being believed. But mostly, I want them to know they're not imagining it. When you feel like you're being pushed out of your own life, you probably are. When the official narrative doesn't match your memory, trust your memory. When people use your love against you, when they weaponize your care for someone else to limit your power, that's when you stop accepting their version of events and start building your own. That's when you start counting the money and checking the receipts. That's when you stop being grateful and start being ungovernable. Wayne is 9 now. He uses his communication tablet to tell elaborate jokes that I don't always understand but always laugh at. He has opinions about music, about food, about the documentaries we watch together. He still requires intensive care, still has complex medical needs, still uses a wheelchair and feeding tube and adaptive equipment. But he's mine again. Not because I won a custody battle or because a judge believed I was the better parent. Because I stopped fighting for the right to be considered adequate and started demanding accountability from the people who'd positioned themselves as superior. Because I used the only leverage they gave me, access to their financial records, and I didn't look away from what I found. Because when they offered me the choice between my son's care and my son's custody, I refused to accept that those things had to be separate. Because I understood that love without authority is just observation, and gratitude without reciprocity is just subjugation. Loretta still sends emails sometimes, updates about family events, questions about Wayne's health, carefully worded requests to expand her visitation time or remove the supervision requirement. I respond politely, briefly. I thank her for her interest in Wayne's well-being. I never thank her for her help. That gratitude belongs to someone I used to be, someone who thought she had to earn the right to raise her own child, who believed that accepting less was the same as being practical, who confused dependence with partnership. I'm not her anymore. I'm the woman who counted the receipts and found the truth in the margins. I'm the woman who used their own weapon against them. I'm the woman they created when they mistook maternal love for weakness and documentation for paranoia. I'm ungovernable now, and my son is home.